This is Aaron Newcomb, and on this episode of Floss Weekly, Simon Phipps joins me to talk about the Hiawatha Webserver, a lightweight yet secure web server that anybody can run. You're not going to want to miss it. It's coming up right now on Floss Weekly.
Netcasts you love.
From people you trust.
This is Twit.
Bandwidth for Floss Weekly is provided by CacheFly at CACHEFLY.com.
This is Floss Weekly with Aaron Newcomb and Simon Phipps, episode 448 for Friday, September 1st, 2017. Hiawatha Webserver. This episode of Floss Weekly is brought to you by the Amazon EC2 container service from AWS. Deploy Docker apps to the cloud without worrying about installing, updating, operating, or scaling container infrastructure. Learn how developers are deploying scalable apps at ecs.aws today. Hey everybody, it's Floss Weekly, the show about free Libre open source software. That's the acronym. You should know it by now, but maybe you're new to the show and you don't know about it. Well, that's what we're going to talk about today. I'm your host today, Aaron Newcomb, and I'm sitting in for Randall, who is away today. If you're watching live, a little bit of an odd time here, Friday, but that's okay. We'll talk about open source any day of the week. As always, I do have a lovely co-host. I'll get it one way or the other. And this week it's Simon Phipps. Hey, Simon, how are you?
I'm very well, thank you, Aaron. This is the Sun Microsystems diaspora today.
Yes, that's right. We're all mourning. We're all in mourning with things that have gone on from. So, of course, Simon and I worked together at Sun. Simon was the chief open source officer. Is that right?
That's right. Yep.
Yeah, quite a title, actually. I mean, that's one of the things that encouraged me to join Sun in the first place. Was it was a company that had a chief open source officer. I was like, oh, that's a company I want to work for.
Pretty sure we were the first one. I don't think there was a chief open source officer anywhere before. There were people who were doing kind of that sort of job. But I went to Jonathan Schwartz and said, if you're going to make open source a core part of the strategy, you need somebody who's got a job title that's responsible for it. And to my great surprise, he said yes and gave it to me.
That's great. That's the way you gotta grab the bull by the horns. So thank you for being with us. Where are you speaking to us from, by the way?
I am in the balmy 22 degrees centigrade temperatures of Southampton, where the sky is bluish, the tops of the trees are lit by the sunset, and I have my cup of tea to keep me refreshed during the show.
And I am in San Francisco sweating it out. Actually, it's not too bad in the city here, but it's a lot warmer in places like Petaluma, where John is, our engineer, and also in Benicia in the East Bay where I'm at. It's pretty much all of those areas. It's going to get over 100 degrees today. So very seasonal temperatures for us here. It's funny that you mentioned centigrade because I was just watching a Vox video where they were talking about a little bit of the history of centigrade and why in the world isn't America. Why are we still using Fahrenheit? Why aren't we so weird?
Yes,
I completely agree.
That isn't that isn't the biggest question at the front of my mind on that topic. But anyway, we probably ought to talk about Hiawatha Webserver.
That's right. Keep it on track. Keep it focused. So yeah, we are going to talk about Hiawatha Webserver today. Kind of excited about it. Web servers can be a little bit of a dry topic. I mean, 10 years ago, even 20 years ago now, of course, web servers were all abuzz. And it's always interesting to me to see that there are still plenty of developments going on in that space. Mostly from my point of view, working on small projects and doing a lot of makery type things. I'm into the smaller, lightweight web servers, and it seems like this is one of them. So I'm actually kind of curious to see how it stands up against, not only the big web servers like Apache and those types of things, but also the smaller lightweight ones like Light HTTP or however you say that. I always get it mixed up. And that do you focus much on web servers? Do you ever get your hands dirty, as it were, with web servers, Simon?
Really, not with web servers. No, my hands get dirty with many other things. But web servers have never really been my thing. I tend to be interested in system software and networks and devices, but not actually in web servers for some reason. I'm quite interested in the name. Finding out, I assume that's a hint towards Apache, and I'll be interested to find out about if there's a community around it.
Yeah, definitely. Absolutely. And it's probably good, actually, because I think it makes for a better show. If we're all the experts and we start getting down in the weeds too quickly, then people that don't know much about it kind of feel left out, I think, sometimes. So this will be actually a really good show for everybody to learn a little bit today. Before we do bring on our guests, we need to thank the sponsor of our show, actually. So let's do that right now. Today's show, I'm happy to say, is brought to you by the Amazon EC2 container service from Amazon Web Services. If you're a developer, you know that developers love Docker containers. It's true. I talk to developers all day long, and they absolutely live in the container ecosystem. They love them because they give applications portability and consistency all the way from your laptop to production. But things can get complicated fast when the time comes for you to deploy, manage, scale, and secure containerized apps to the cloud. Well, Amazon EC2 Container Service makes it easy to run Docker apps in production by installing, updating, operating, scaling your infrastructure. It all happens automatically. You use simple API calls and you can launch and stop Docker-enabled applications, query the state of your clusters, natively integrate with powerful AWS services like security groups, elastic load balancing, EBS volumes, and more. Best of all, you only pay for the AWS compute and storage resources that you actually use. So with the Amazon EC2 Container Service, you can focus on building apps, not spending time deploying, scaling, and managing your container infrastructure. It's time to get back to what you do best. So learn about Amazon EC2 Container Service at ecs.aws today. That's ecs.aws. And we thank them for their support of FLOSS Weekly. It's great. I love Amazon and AWS. Use it all the time. All right, so let's go ahead and bring on our guest. Today's guest is Hugo Leischink. I hope I said that correctly. Hugo, how did I do on that last name?
It's pronounced Leischink.
It sounds the same to me.
It's okay.
I tried. I'll just call you Hugo. So Hugo, how are you doing and where are you speaking to us from?
I'm doing fine. I'm here I live in the Netherlands. So that's where I'm at right now.
And are you in the office or at home or
no,
not to get too personal?
At the attic of my home.
Great. Awesome. Well, thanks for joining. So what's your involvement with the Hiawatha Webserver project?
I'm the author, the one and only author of the Hiawatha Webserver.
Great. And why did you explain the origins? I mean, why do we need another web server? Why did you start this project?
I started in 2002. Before that, I did a lot of programming in Borland Pascal, assembler, and I wanted to learn the C language. So the best way to learn it is to actually do it. So I wanted to start a new project. At that time, I maintained a lot of Linux servers. I was a student at the Delft University of Technology back then. I maintained a lot of Linux servers for friends. They used it to share a single internet connection within their students' homes. And it was a lot of not very advanced hardware. And they used it as a router, but also wanted to use it as a web server. So they brought with only 1 megabyte or a few megabytes and a 386 86 processor. So to install the Apache web server on it, it took away a lot of performance of the router functionality. So I started to write a very small and simple web server that could only do the GET HTTP method. So they had a web server on it and could still use it as a router for their internet connection. And that's how it started. I never expected it to become the web server it is now. Only for simple HTTP tasks. But I started experimenting, did some experimentation with it on security. I liked programming to have a hobby, and that's how Hiawatha grew to what it is now.
Yeah, that's great. So it was really, we talk a lot about how open source projects, many of them are people scratching their own itch. So they have in this case, it sounds like your itch was you wanted to learn C and had an interesting problem you wanted to solve. And you just went after it. I think that's great. How would you say that Hiawatha compares to some of the more popular web servers that are out on the market today, like Apache and Nginx, and the lightweight one that I'm most familiar with, which is LightTPD.
Lighty.
How do you say it?
Lighty. That's
Lighty.
I think is the official name for it. But okay,
sounds good.
Well, one of the main differences in how Hiawatha handles requests is that Apache wants to do everything as fast as possible, accept all the requests and they are sent to it. And the idea in Hiawatha is that Hiawatha will only serve you as a client if you behave nicely. So you have to send a valid request. And of course, Apache will also ignore invalid requests. But in Hiawatha, there can be a penalty. You can be banned. You can be blocked. You have to behave nice as a client, send correct HTTP requests, don't flood the server, don't do anything weird, or you have in Hiawatha the configuration option to ban such clients. So in Apache and Nginx, as I see it, performance, speed comes first, and in Hiawatha, security comes first. So that's one of the main differences.
So, I mean, does it work similarly to a jail scenario where someone's trying to brute force log in and they get 3 invalid login attempts, and then like on a lot of Linux servers, for example, they'll set up a jail and they'll say, okay, this connection can't go through again for 30 minutes or something like that. I mean, it sounds like it's set up to deal, especially for things like DDoS attacks and malformed HTTP request attacks.
Yeah. Before I wrote Hiawatha, I also used Apache, and there were several occasions when a bad CGI application killed the web server because it ate up all the processor power. So there was one application, one CGI application that used all the processor time, and there was no way of starting a terminal. The web server did not respond to any other request. So one application could kill my web server, and I thought that was unacceptable. Also with clients, there could be one single client who could start flooding my server with all kinds of weird requests. And there was no way in Apache back then to block out bad CGIs, block out bad behaving clients. So that's why I wrote Hiawatha, to be more in control of my own web server.
Yeah, and would you refer to it as more of a lightweight web server, similar to Lighty, as you called it, or does it really have all the features of a Apache or an Nginx?
Yeah, is it light? Yeah. It's smaller. The binary is smaller, but it's not a real fair comparison, because in Hiawatha you need, for example, PHP. You use it as a separate process and use fast CGI to connect to it, and Apache has a PHP as a library, lib or mod PHP it's called, if I remember correctly. So it's not a real fair comparison, but you have an option to strip the Hiawatha binary, and if I use all the features, of course, but if you take out all the unnecessary features, you have a single binary of 100 kilobytes. So that's quite a small web server, I think.
Right, and I'm sure it's can handle multiple instances and things like that to make sure that it performs correctly or robustly, I should say.
Yeah, it has everything a modern web server needs. Yeah.
So the big reason that I should use this then is that the security is more robust, would you say, or easier to configure? Like, why would I pick this over Apache, let's say?
If you want sane default security configuration, you could use Hiawatha. There are a lot of experimental features which has in reality proven useful. And there is something called mod security. Of course, I only use Hiawatha, not Apache, so I haven't looked at all those all the details of those modules. But in Apache, you need a mod security and an external library to make it more secure. And in Hiawatha, it comes with the web server itself. So it has everything to become a more secure web server, and you are in more control, from my point of view, than with the Apache web server. So it's more secure, more in control, and a lot of users who used the Apache web server or the Nginx web server before, many of them have told me they really like the easy configuration syntax.
So can you elaborate on that? When you say the easy configuration syntax, what does it look like? What's different about it?
I don't know if it's still possible today, but when I used Apache, I could have a configuration in which I define one virtual host running on or listening to port 80 using simple plain HTTP, another virtual host listening to port 80 talking HTTPS, a third one using port 443 using HTTP, and another one, point 443, using HTTPS. And I could start a web server, and of course that's an insane configuration. What will happen if I talk to port 80? Will it speak HTTP or HTTPS? And the web server said, configuration fine, okay, let's start. And yeah, I had no idea what it would do. So there's, I have a different kind of setting up HTTP and HTTPS connections. So it automatically goes correct. And I always use like a setting and its value. Well, yeah, you have to look at the configuration example. There's one on the Hiawatha Webserver website. So I have a more consistent way of configuring the web server.
I'm kind of curious.
But it's of course also a matter of taste. But
well, sure. I mean, but I think there is something to be said for simple configuration, just from an efficiency standpoint. I think it is important as long as it's secure. And I want to get back to security for a second, because we talked about a couple different, people sending misformed or malformed HTTP requests. We talked about kind of brute force attacks and things like that. What about responding to outside software influences? So I'm thinking back to like the Heartbleed thing, and I mean, is there anything inherently in Hiawatha that can protect against security vulnerabilities from other packages?
Well, the Heartbleed, for example, Hiawatha wasn't vulnerable. I don't use the OpenSSL library. I used it before, but the documentation was for a long time was incomplete. Even with the release version 1, the website still said incomplete documentation. That's unacceptable for me. I've looked at the source code. I didn't like it, so I used another SSL library. It's formerly known as Polar SSL, but now called Embed TLS. And I have more faith in that library than in OpenSSL. So that's one thing, and it's more because in Hiawatha, I distrust a lot of things by default instead of accepting and trusting a lot. So I distrust a lot of stuff, and a client needs to prove itself to be trustworthy, speaking HTTP correctly, and then I will serve it. But I distrust clients by default.
That seems to be. I've got two more questions, and then I want to let Simon get a word in edgewise here. I mean, isn't that? I guess there's a counter argument to be made that if it's a popular library or client, and a lot of people are using it, that that would improve. It would make it. It would improve the code. It would improve the detection of things like Heartbleed. But you're saying no. I don't buy that, right?
No. Well, Heartbleed has proven that a library being used much, or a piece of software being used much, makes it more secure. In many cases, it could be true, but there's no guarantee, because that means that everybody who uses the code, that user should also verify its code, and that's not what's going on. A lot of users, they only use it; they don't look at its code, they don't do an audit or whatever. So, having many users being better for security, that's not true.
Okay, fair point. Let's talk a little bit about who's using this. Yeah, it's been around for quite a while. Can you give us examples of people that are using this and what they're using it for?
To be honest, I have no idea how many people use it. I try to get an idea of how many people use by posting requests on my weblog. So let me know if you use it. My best guess would be 300 people. I don't know. You have a website, Shodan HQ, and you can search the internet for services. So I've used it quite some times for seeing how many Hiawatha web servers there are, and the number it's about, if I remember correctly, 3,000-4,000. But of course, the Hiawatha Webserver allows you to change the server string settings, so you can set up an Hiawatha Webserver pretending it to be another web server. So that it should be at least 4,000 or 3,000 or 4,000, but I have no idea.
Fascinating. So Hugo, you've said several times now that you're the only person that develops this. I had a look into GitHub. You've got Chris Wodge, who seems to do package maintenance for you on Debian and other platforms. Is there anybody else out there that's contributing, or is it when you say is that hyperbolic when you say it's just you, or is it really just you?
A lot of people send in requests, bug reports. Several people help me with development of WebServer, but I'm the only one doing the actually code writing.
Right.
And so I have a good friend of mine who is helping me with the CMake, the building stuff. He's more experienced with that than I am. So if I have some questions, he helps me. So of course there are people who are helping me, but most of the code is written by me.
Right. And so is this in any way connected with your day job, or is this purely something that you do when no one is paying you?
It's purely a hobby. I don't do anything at this moment with software development. I work as a IT security advisor, security consultant for the Dutch government, but that doesn't involve code writing or web server configuration or anything
right.
related to web servers.
You haven't got them using Hiawatha then?
Not yet.
So I see that you licensed it under GPL v2. Could you talk me through why you chose that? Because Apache uses a very a non-reciprocal license that leaves people free to commercialize it, whereas by using GPL v2, you cut off a lot of avenues to use, particularly in the embedded world. Why did you pick GPL v2?
I've chosen it quite some time ago. Probably when I released the first version in 2002, and to be honest, it works for me. So I haven't given that much thought. So it was the best choice 15 years ago, and to be honest, I haven't looked at other licenses. So that's why it's still right. GPL2.
I was just skimming through the licenses. Do you use the language that says or any later version, or is it strictly GPL v2?
At this time, strictly GPL2. But for example, if I'm always willing to discuss other licenses. So if someone really wants to use it, but GPL2 is an issue, well, contact me.
Right. So you was there a reason why you decided not to use to explain why I'm asking, that clause in the GPL v2 allows the license to stay modern. So if you use the original license, the language of the GPL v2, when the FSF releases a new license like GPL v3, your users have got the option to use it under GPL v3 as well without you needing to take any action. Was there a particular reason for not allowing that avenue?
No, as I said, I have looked at GPL2 15 years ago, and maybe this is a good reminder of me for me to look at the license again. So I focus at writing the code, and for me, having it open source is the most important thing. And so
right. Yeah, no, that's great. I'm the last person that's going to tell you not to do open source. Trust me. Okay. But it is worth taking a look at whether you might want to add the or any later version clause, because it could well make things easier for some of your potential users. One of the other questions that sprang to my mind while I was looking at it: do you support Let's Encrypt? Because a lot of people are finding that makes life a whole lot easier for SSL certificates, which were actively hostile previously. So you're supporting that? Yeah,
that's how I like to publish my project. You don't have to be an expert in HTTP to use my web server, and I also believe you should not have to be an expert on certificates and Let's Encrypt to install a Let's Encrypt certificate in your web server. So I have Hiawatha ships with its own Let's Encrypt script. That script can you only have to use the host name of the website you want to have a certificate for. Hiawatha will look in that script, the Let's Encrypt script will look in the Hiawatha configuration, does all the communication with the Let's Encrypt CH server, and puts in the required authentication file within the web server of in the website's home directory, and then you have a Let's Encrypt certificate. So it's really tightly integrated with the Hiawatha Webserver, and it from my point of view, it can't be made more easy to obtain a Let's Encrypt certificate. Right.
Well, I don't know about you, I would really encourage every owner of a web server to go get a Let's Encrypt certificate and install it, because it's free of charge. It's dead easy, and there's really no excuse for not supporting HTTPS anymore, in my opinion.
True.
So what would you say was the state of Hiawatha now? Is it finished? I see that on GitHub there haven't actually been any commits for over a month. So is that simply because you took vacation, or is that because Hiawatha is finished now?
It's a very mature web server. It's not finished because it's a hobby, and I'm not done hobbying with computers. So no, it's not finished. One major new feature that has to be implemented is HTTP2, new version of the HTTP protocol. That will take some time. So, and holiday, other projects. So it's not, of course, a dead project, but that's the reason there hasn't been a new release in quite some time.
Right. So, in terms of new features that are coming up, what do you think of HTTP2? Do you think that it's a good thing, or is it something you'll be gritting your teeth and unhappily implementing?
That last one. I understand why we have HTTP2 and why it is what it is now. But personally, I don't like it. It's a big, complex protocol, and many users, especially not the Hiawatha users, they don't need it. I understand that why Google. It's of course based on the Speedy protocol. I understand why Google wrote or developed the Speedy protocol and why we have now HTTP2. But from my point of view, it's a protocol by Google for Google. If you're not Google or a big company who's doing things like Google, I don't think you will not benefit much from HTTP2. And I really like the how do you say it in English? The KISS principle. Keep it short and simple. And from my point of view, HTTP2 is everything but simple and short. No, I don't like it, but there are some external libraries which have implemented that protocol. So I'm looking into using one of those libraries, and or actually I only know one, but who has implemented the entire protocol. But of course, it takes some time for me to see how it works. If it's secure enough, do I trust it enough to use it in my web server, and then to, of course, take the time to actually implement it.
Right. So now you've clearly got strong opinions about web technologies. It looks like that you had a visceral reaction to OpenSSL. You mentioned a little bit earlier about dumping it. Was it purely the unfinishedness and the complexity, or was there anything to do with its community as well that offended you?
No, I'm not really familiar with the community. It's the interface. It was not simple. Its code it didn't match with my standards. And I had some issue with implementing the server name indication SNI, and I couldn't find it in the documentation. And back then, Polar SSL, now Embed TLS, it had clear documentation, and it took me about 1 week to switch from OpenSSL to Polar SSL at the time, including the that new feature, the server name indication. So that there was no reason for me to sticking with OpenSSL.
And I just one more question on that too. I mean, do you ever find that people they just say no? If we're standardized on OpenSSL. If you're not going to use that, then forget it. Or are people generally like, oh, okay, I don't know much about Embed TLS, so this may be a novice question to ask, but I mean, do people ever push back on that and say no, we can't use Hiawatha?
The people who have contacted me were very happy with the new SSL library because of that they had no issue with the Heartbleed attack.
Right.
Especially after that attack, they really, really liked my decision of switching to another SSL library.
Yeah, I can imagine that made it a little bit easier for people. I'm kind of curious. You said that you have written a lot of this in using PHP. It sounds like you like PHP. In fact, I think you actually work on another project. Is it the Banshee PHP framework? Can you talk a little bit about your involvement with that?
Yeah, it's my PHP framework for building new websites, and it's different than all the other frameworks or content management system because it's more of a hybrid. There are a lot of frameworks, and the disadvantage of using a framework is that you need to build all the CMS functionality. It's only a framework, so if you want a login page or a page to maintain users, you have to build it yourself. It gives you a lot of flexibility. On the other hand, you have a lot of CMS systems which come as a complete package. But changing code is, it's not what you should do. You should use the code as it is, and from within the interface, change the layout, add new stuff, and that sort of things. But so there are advantage and disadvantage on both sides. But I created something new, and I think they call it more of a content management framework. So I started writing a framework, and on top of that, I added CMS functionality. But if you within my framework, I still call it framework, but it's actually the hybrid. But there's it has a MVC model of MVC. How do you say it? Design. So if you empty the controller, the model, and the view directories, what's left is the framework. So it you can add all the kinds of functionality you want. So there's a more it's more divided.
Mm-hmm. I was gonna. I'm glad you started talking about CMS systems. That was going to be my next question. Actually, is how does Hiawatha play with popular CMS systems? I don't know which ones are popular anymore. I still run a couple of sites that are using Drupal. I assume Drupal's still popular, but
WordPress is the most popular.
Is there anything I need to watch out for in terms of using a CMS system like Drupal with Hiawatha?
No, it runs fine with all the popular CMSs. At my Hiawatha Webserver website, I have a page which has all the configuration option required for all the popular CMSs. So there's absolutely no issue with any popular framework or CMS. Runs all fine.
Awesome. And how does for PHP? I assume PHP is fine, obviously, given your background. But I mean, I'm just trying to compare this with how I would set something up on an Apache web server. For example, they have the module system, excuse me, or did have, and a lot of other web servers have a similar sort of you want a particular PAM, security module. You just, install, declare that you're going to start using this module and make sure it's installed. Is it a similar process with Hiawatha, or is it different?
No, if you're doing something, as I call it, weird, Hiawatha is not going to support it because, from my point of view, keep it short and simple. A web server is a web server, and don't try to do anything else within your web server. If you want your application to have that kind of functionality, build it in your web application, and don't use it. Don't abuse your web server to do all kind of functionality your web application should be doing. There are some applications who require all weird and huge rewrite rules, and that's I don't like it, because you then try to place some how your application should work, the routing within your application. You expect your web server to do it. So it's functionality from your web application. You put it in the web server configuration. That's weird. So I've had many requests for all kinds of functionality, which I simply declined because, from my point of view, that's not what should be. That's the web server is not the right place for that kind of for that kind of functionality. It should be placed within the application.
All right. Just to roll back a little bit to Banshee, I was just looking in the source code a moment ago. The license that you're using for Banshee doesn't look like it's an open source license. So is it your intent for that to not be open source?
It's not one of the mainstream open source libraries. No, it simply says you can do whatever you want with it as long as you keep the copyright messages intact, because I understand if it would be, for example, GPL, then if you use my framework and create a website within it, the GPL license requires you to open source your own website code. And
right, but why invent your own license? Why not just use, what you've written here could well be replaced with 3-clause BSD. It would do the same thing. Why not use that instead of using your own license and making people from companies unable to use your software?
In what way would a company be unable to use my software? Because it doesn't. It says don't change the copyright messages and whatever. Do with it what you want. I'm a IT guy. I'm not familiar. I'm not a lawyer. So all those licenses, I want to write code.
Yeah. Well, I'm very happy to talk to you about it after the show if you want to. The reason that you use an OSI approved standard license is so that people don't have to do that evaluation themselves. They don't have to look at what you've invented here and work out for themselves whether there's a hidden trap. Because OSI's approved licenses have already been screened by the community. They're standard and people know that they can trust them.
Yeah.
So it would be far better for you to use a standard license rather than make your own up, because then when people look at it, they'll be able to go, oh yeah, that's BSD 3-clause, rather than, oh, what's this? We better study and analyze this. We had better get corporate counsel to review it for us. I had better engage a lawyer. So that's why you don't make up your own license. Yeah. It scares people away. But very happy to help with that later.
Yeah, sure. But I really wonder how many people actually read the entire license text. And on the other hand, the Apache of the Banshee license, it's just a few lines. So if you really want to read it, it should take you 10 seconds.
Yeah, that's not really the point. I don't think very many people read open source licenses after they have checked their standard ones. I know lots of people who are very concerned when they find something isn't under a standard license. And I think that's the point. So one other question I was going to ask you was the name Hiawatha. Where did that come from? Why did you pick that? Is that a snipe at Apache, or is that a reference to the poem, or what is that?
When I started writing Hiawatha, I never expected it to become the web server it is now. I always thought, it would remain this small, tiny web server. So on one end, we have the big Apache web server, the big Indian tribe, and so the counterpart would be the small, tiny Indian. So Hiawatha.
Cool, very cool. Well, thanks for joining us today, Hugo. We've got to wrap up, and I've got a couple questions that I don't know about legally, but certainly in terms of keeping our listeners happy, we always have to ask these same questions at the end of every show. But before I get to that, I just wanted to ask, is there anything that we didn't ask that you want to make sure people know about the Hiawatha web server, or anything else?
There's actually one feature I'm think is really what makes Hiawatha different than the other web server is the Hiawatha, as I called Hiawatha Monitor. It's of course Banshee based, a web application that allows you to collect statistics information from your own web server and display it in an interface. For myself, I have of course I use Hiawatha, and I have don't know the exact number, 20, 30 websites running. I don't keep track of all the stuff that's going on, there are a lot of log files that's of course full of the stuff that's going on. But of course, I don't check it regularly, and there are a lot of I'm sure there are a lot of solutions for that. But I used my own or created my own, which is of course neatly integrated with the web server, and it allows you to see what's going on in the number of requests, the failed requests, failed logins, security issues, files not found, the forbidden error codes. So everything what's going on, it tells you where to look, in what log file you should look to see what's going on, to find the interesting things. Having a secure web server is, of course, one thing, but to keep track of your secure web server is another thing. So that's what the Hiawatha Monitor does for you. It points you to interesting log file entries. And I think that's what makes Hiawatha different from all the other web servers. And I think it's really worth checking out.
Yeah, well, you certainly convinced me that there's room for alternative web servers still in this day and age. We haven't exhausted the room for improvements in this space. So really want to thank you for coming on. But I do need to ask you these two questions as we wrap up here. The first one is, what's your favorite scripting language?
PHP.
That's what I figured. I kind of figured PHP would be your answer, but you never know. Sometimes we have people that work in one language for their day job, and then they surprise us. And what's your favorite text editor?
VI improved.
Yay! That's great. I always cringe when people say Emacs. Of course, Randall likes Emacs. He's an Emacs guy, and we've even had people at our makerspace recently that are trying to teach Emacs as a way to learn all sorts of things, which is great. It's just I can't get over the Emacs hurdles. I'm very much in your court there with VI. So great. Well, thank you, Hugo, very much for joining us and talking about Hiawatha Webserver.
Yeah, thanks for having me on your show.
All right, you bet. So, Simon, what do you think about the Hiawatha Webserver?
Well, it's an interesting project. I hadn't run into it before. It looks small and tight. I think it would get wider use with a community around it, and with a bit more attention to licensing and other artifacts of community. My sense was that Hugo isn't too worried about that. That it's something to keep the fingers occupied during the long, cold European winters. So it's interesting stuff, and I think it's got a lot of potential. And one day somebody's going to find that it's fantastic. Yeah, no, I completely agree, and I did mean what I said there at the end. I think there is space for development here with web servers, and certainly this is. With thousands on the order of low thousands people installing it, it's not the most popular web server running on the internet today, but it's certainly serving a niche for some people who want something that's really easy to configure and has security in mind out of the box. So I think I agree with what you said, and I'm glad to see that there's still development going on here. Although it does sound like Hiawatha's been around for a while, a lot longer than I thought it had. Yeah. Look at the history. It's about 15 years that it's been around now. So that's a good long time. I was a little sad to see that both Banshee and Monitor are under non-OSI approved licenses that have been made up by the author. That's kind of sad. It makes me, as an OSI board member, feel that maybe we haven't been explaining it enough to the independent-minded developers out there. I'd quite like to see that fixed. Yeah, and but I do understand what he's talking about it. Sometimes it's an aftersight. It shouldn't be, obviously. But it's so easy, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, but my experience is it's so easy to implement an approved license, especially with a small project like this, that it's just it's a shame not to, because you do run into businesses, especially, that they want to see something that they have already approved. And if it's something strange, weird, different, other than the norm of these set licenses that they know
and they know them well and they can just approve it like that, then they either say, no, we're not running it, or it takes them a long time and it just gets stuck in the process somewhere. So,
yeah, the license is all about creating a space where it's safe to collaborate. And it's a hygiene factor. If you get the licensing right, everyone ignores it, frankly. If you get the licensing wrong, people don't show up because the place is lacking in hygiene. And so it is extremely easy to use an OSI-approved license. There are websites out there. We actually link to them from the OSI license list now. We link to resources that help you understand and pick licenses. So it's as easy to do an open source license as it is to use Let's Encrypt to get SSL. And I think a healthy web activity would do both of those.
Right. I would say it's easier, actually. All right. So speaking of things that are easy, let's talk about what's coming up on Floss Weekly, because we make it easy to watch this show by getting great guests and wonderful projects. How was that?
That was pretty slick as segues go, but yeah.
I did my best. So let's talk about what's coming up on, so let's see, today's September 1st. September? Holy moly. Time flies. Coming up on September 6th is we're going to be talking to Eric Hansen and Mickey. I don't have a last name, but Eric and Mickey are coming to talk about Aqua Meta. So just looking at their GitHub page, Aqua Meta is they claim it's a web development environment where instead of storing code as flat files in the file system, everything's stored in Postgres in a database. Sounds like fun, especially if you're a database-oriented kind of person. Coming up after that on the September 14th is friendup.cloud. That we get a lot of cloud-related projects here on the show, of course, and there's more and more all the time. This one is all about connecting devices and people and web technologies. It looks pretty interesting. They call it the Friend Unifying Platform. So it sounds like they've got their marketing work done. We'll find out if the project is actually useful or not. And then after that, here's a fun one. I think you and I should come back for this one, Simon. On September 20th, we'll be talking to Bob Quillen and Vish Abrams about Oracle open source. What do you think? Should we come back and talk to our old friends at Oracle?
I think they would really welcome us coming back and talking about things. I have to say, actually, to give them their due, they did follow through in contributing NetBeans to Apache. It was just last week that it showed up there and became an Apache project. So Excellent. They did follow through with that. There's a few other things that I would still like to discuss with them, though.
Well, we'll see what happens. We'll let Randall decide who gets to co-host that show. It's just funny that we have the background that we do. And then coming up on September 27th, last but not least, Jacob Smith is going to be talking about Jacob Smith and Dan Cohn are going to be talking about CNCF, Cloud Native Computing Foundation. They're going to be talking about what they do with the cloud, sustaining and integrating open source technologies as part of cloud services, I guess. So that'll be fun. And if I got that wrong, you'll just have to tune in and see whether I got those descriptions right or wrong. But we got a lot of stuff coming up on Floss Weekly. Simon, anything coming up for you? Anything you want to plug?
Yeah, I've got a load of conferences that I'd like to tell people about. So there's lots of famous conferences you've heard of, but there's some smaller ones coming up that would be worth attending if you're in the area. On the 15th of September, there is a conference in Winchester in the United Kingdom called Geeky, which is all about the lore surrounding the geek lifestyle. There's going to be all sorts of very fascinating talks there. It's worth your time to attend. It's on a Friday. Then I'm giving the keynote at the Copano conference in Arnhem in the Netherlands on the 27th and 28th of September. And if you're a Copano user, you'll be very welcome to join us. Then in October 11th to 13th, there is the LibreOffice conference in Rome. That's free to attend. And you can hear all the people who make LibreOffice, the great piece of software that it is, talking about their work, and you can join in with the community. Then at the beginning of November, the 4th of November, there is a conference in London that would be great to have people attend. It's the Open Rights Group annual conference, and we have a lineup of speakers coming to that conference that will be really absolutely fascinating. So look out for that. The lineup is going to be announced on that in the next few weeks. And then finally, in Italy, there is the South Tyrol Free Software Conference. It's one of the world's longest running free software conferences, and that's happening on the 10th of November in the beautiful city of Bolzano in the Dolomites in the north of Italy. I would love to see any listeners and viewers at any of those conferences. If you do come up and say hello. I love hearing from people that watch Floss Weekly and hearing about the show from them.
Yeah, that's great. And Meshed Insights, is that how you say that?
Meshed Insights.
Oh, Meshed. Meshed.
It's the company that I started when I left Sun. It's a company that focuses on the meshed society. Society used to be hierarchical. There used to be control points. There used to be the man telling you what you could and couldn't do. And now the internet has made everybody a peer of everybody else in a global mesh. And so my company advises other companies all about how to do business in the meshed society. Perfect. And do you still run the website I remember from yours was webmink.net? Is that right? Are you still doing that? Yeah, I've still got webmink.com. That tends to be about politics, religion, gardening, all of those sorts of things. I try to keep those things away from the business-related things on Meshed Insights. I'm still writing for Linux Magazine in Europe, Linux Pro Magazine in North America. I have a monthly column in there that people would be very welcome to buy that magazine. It's full of how-to articles every month, and I'm the little unusual political, social think piece in the Linux Voice section. Well, that's great. You're doing so much, Simon. Always a pleasure to be on with you. And I won't comment on the politics. I'll just say keep up the good work because you write good stuff. So thank you very much. That's all I'm going to say about politics on the show. As far as I'm concerned, you can follow me. You may know that I run a little place called Benicia Makerspace up in my little town of Benicia, which is a community space where people can pay kind of like a gym membership. You pay a fee and you get access to tools and equipment and all that stuff. There's a spot that we ran on how to build your own makerspace right here on the Twit network not too long ago on the new screensavers. So you can get a look at what that is. We're actually running a crowdfunding campaign right now. We need a little extra cash because we're expanding into a new space. And we're trying to outfit it with, some decent, not state of the art, but some decent equipment and furniture for kids and adults that are taking classes there to feel comfortable, make sure that the learning experience is a good one. So if you are interested, you can head over to generosity.com and do a search for Benicia Makerspace. You'll find our crowdfunding campaign there. We have a long way to go to reach our goals. So I'd really appreciate anybody that's willing to throw a few bucks our way. Just head over there and take a peek at some of the reward levels. We got some really cool stuff going on. I won't go into the details, but please do take a look. Who's that guy? Man, he needs to grow some hair. You can also check out my book, Linux for Makers, which is on Amazon and in better bookstores everywhere. Do bookstores still exist? I think it is in bookstores, actually, if you go out and take a look. Pick up that book if you have someone that you know that's interested in uses Raspberry Pi, wants to get started with the very basics of Linux, because that can be a big barrier for people coming over to Raspberry Pi is, what's this Linux stuff? What's a command line? I have no idea. So I wrote a little book to try to explain that to people, try to describe some of the basics of Linux, and please take a look there. And also, if you're going to be in New York City, boy, we're doing a lot of plugs today. Sorry, folks. But if you're going to be in New York City, I will be there on 13th and 14th of September. At my company's big conference there. I work for a company called New Relic, and we do this regional conference, but our big one's in New York City this year. It's called Future Stack. So I will be there running around like a madman, but if you are a New Relic customer and you're in the area, I would highly encourage you to sign up and come to Future Stack. And if you see me there, please do say hi.
because sometimes I see people look at me sideways and it takes them a while to come up and say hi. I'm a very shy person myself, so I understand, but just come up and say hi. I love talking to people that recognize me from the Twit Network. Okay, that's it. We're not doing any more plugs. We're done. Thanks for joining, everybody. Thanks for watching. You can always follow us online. You can always watch the show live.twit.tv, or you can also join us on IRC. We have live chat going on. If you want to ask questions during the live show, this is the best way to get engaged. IRC.twit.tv is where you can find us there. I think Randall will be back next time, I assume. So until then, we'll see you next time on Floss Weekly. Where's my camera? There it is. Floss Weekly.